The war between the states has long been a popular colloquialism to describe the American Civil War. It's been this way for well over 100 years. But the term war between the states doesn't accurately describe the war west of the Mississippi River. The Civil War wasn't only between the states. There were a dozen territories that raised troops on behalf of either the Union or Confederate cause, and the contributions from the territories are sadly too often overlooked. Most of these territories were in the Trans-Mississippi and Pacific theaters. In this miniseries, we look at some of those territories and their contributions to the war effort. Washington Territory. In 1861, this territory included all of present-day Washington State, Idaho, and the western part of Montana. Even with all that land, there were only 11,593 people counted in the 1860 census. But remember, this didn't count Native American tribes that hadn't integrated with Western society, which really would add a few thousand more people to the official census count. This territory was the furthest removed from the fighting in the Civil War, but people from the WT still participated in the Union war effort and even served in the Union Army. There was a network of Confederate spies and guerrillas in eastern Canada that did acts of terrorism in the American Northeast, and these acts of sabotage were an equally valid concern on the West Coast. In May 1863, the U.S. consul in Vancouver, British Columbia, reported to the captain of the USS Saginaw, "There is still in this city a rebel organization, which has had several meetings within the last few weeks. They are awaiting, it seems from rumors, the receipt of letters of marque from the President of the so-called Confederate States." The idea was for Confederate privateers to use the British Columbia coastline as a safe base to strike at the Union Navy and U.S. shipping between Alaska and San Diego. When the war began, Washington already had a territorial militia for several years that it had mobilized several times to fight Native American tribes, and this pattern was repeated in the Civil War. Washington Territory also started raising federal volunteer companies in October 1861. Inside the territory, companies were recruited at Fort Vancouver and Fort Steilacoom. However, due to such a small recruiting pool in a population of 11,000, additional companies made up of Californians were recruited into the Washington Volunteers at Alcatraz Island, San Francisco. Together, all of these companies were the 1st Washington Volunteer Infantry Regiment. Working together with units from the California and Oregon Volunteers, the 1st Washington Infantry took over duties from regular Army units being sent back east to the main theaters of the war. This means that both the territorial militia and federal volunteers occasionally arrested a Copperhead, periodically went on expeditions to fight against Native Americans, and spent lots and lots of time patrolling the wilderness without much to report. There was at least one Washingtonian who did fight the Confederates. Former Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens, who was the Washington Territory's congressional delegate to the House of Representatives when the Civil War began, stepped down from his political office to join the Union Army, and he was killed leading his troops in a charge in the Battle of Chantilly in 1862. Idaho. Kind of. The Idaho Territory was formally organized in 1863. Before that, it was the weird southeastern appendage to the Washington Territory and the western parts of the Dakota Territory. Because Idaho was organized so late in the war, the territory raised no federal volunteers or formal militia units. Although the territory did not participate in the war as a political body, thousands of men who became Idahoans when the borders changed were already serving in the Washington Volunteers or Dakota Volunteers, or had already served in one of the territorial militias. There were 10 Union Army posts in the Idaho Territory between 1863 and 1865. In 1863 and 1864, the U.S. Army's wars against the Klamath and Snake peoples spilled into the Idaho Territory. It was also in Idaho that troops from the 3rd California Infantry committed the Bear River Massacre, wherein hundreds of non-hostile Shoshone people were murdered. The barbarity of that event speaks for itself. Elsewhere in the war effort, a 300-foot steam cruiser was built for the U.S. Navy in 1864. It would become the USS Idaho, but it wasn't commissioned until after the war in 1866. Like the territory it was named for, the ship missed the war. This concludes today's slice of Civil War frontier history. In the next episode in this miniseries, we'll look at the Nevada and Utah territories in the war efforts. Thank you for watching the Civil War Wild West Edition. If you haven't already done so, please hit like and subscribe. It helps this channel with the algorithms so that this content can reach other Civil War scholars just like you.